Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I want to talk to you all about something that gets asked so much from friends and family back in England, from all my friends and family here in the States, and just new people that I meet. So that is, what is it like to live in Florida as a British person? What is it like? Which do I prefer? How is it living here as a British person? What is my experience of it? So that is what I want to talk to you about today in this video, so stay tuned. So for those of you who don't know, I was born and raised in England my whole life. I grew up in England, and then in 2017 in May I flew out to Florida to visit my fiance, and I never returned, and I've been here ever since. We got married and I've just stuck around ever since. You can't get rid of me. No, seriously, I've been here for over 3 years now, so this is just me going over the biggest differences that I've found ever since moving to Florida. So there are definitely pros and cons to living in every single country, and these are just my personal experiences. So in this video I'm going to cover the 5 biggest differences that I have found personally are the biggest changes between living in England and living now in Florida. None of the points that I'm going to mention are in any particular order. These are just overall the 5 biggest changes that I've come across since living in Florida. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 1, one of the biggest changes that I have found since moving to Florida is the driving experience. So for me, I am 100 times more comfortable driving in Florida than I am in England, which is really weird because I took my driving test in England. That was where I learnt to drive. That's the only place I've ever driven prior to moving to Florida. Yet I feel way more comfortable driving in Florida and safer driving in Florida than I do in England. Obviously the roads are a lot bigger, but at the same time the cars are a lot bigger. A lot of people will say, well, your roads are bigger in England. Yeah, but our cars are smaller. The cars are smaller to fit the road, and out here the cars are bigger but the roads are bigger, so it kind of like is the same. For me, people just drive better here in Florida compared to England. We live in a small town. We live in a very like rural town. Have drove in Orlando and Tampa, and yeah, we do go to other bigger cities, which is a different story. But overall, where we live, people drive the speed limit, maybe 10% over. People are just safe drivers. If I was doing the speed limit, I would rarely have someone tailgating me and getting really close behind me, making me uncomfortable. People are just better drivers out here. I love the fact the cars are bigger. I love the fact the roads are bigger. Parking spaces are bigger. Just so many things about the driving experience out here makes me feel so much safer. In England, there's this kind of stereotypical young guys and girls that have these particular cars. If you're from England, you'll totally know this, and they're called boy racers, and they just drive like crazy people down the streets. And I've seen so many different accidents in our area in England, and yeah, I've never seen people driving the way that I've seen them drive in England. Even in the cities out here in Florida, like Orlando and Tampa, I've never seen people drive as wild as I've seen them drive in England. So I just feel so much safer, which is weird because in England we go through a more extensive learning to drive experience and test. We have to do more lessons, and we have to actually like be taught to drive, and then our driving test, we are in a car where we have to actually get on the road and drive. Here in Florida, when I did my tests, and I know this is how like everyone else does it in Florida, I literally was in my own car and we drove around the car park of the DMV, which was really weird. Yeah, that wouldn't happen in England. I actually failed twice in England. That's how like, well, I mean, that could just be that I'm a bad driver, but it also could be that our driving tests are more extensive and thorough in England, yet the drivers just seem really not good. So that's my experience. I've watched other vlogs about what people think of Florida, and people say that Florida drivers are awful because, you know, people come here to retire, and that just Florida drivers are not good drivers. But I disagree, so I'd be really interested to hear your thought, and I'm sure that my husband would agree on this as well because he's from LA, and I will probably never drive in LA in my life because LA drivers scare the insert beep out of me. Like, they are crazy drivers. Like, and I can drive in London, so That says something. Point number 2, the food is so different out here. Okay, so compared to England, if we discuss fast food for a second, in England you have your typical fast food, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Burger King you can occasionally find, and Subway, and then your chip shop. So you have like a handful of takeaway fast food restaurants. If I wanted to go and get fast food out here, which, you know, this girl loves a cheat day, I love my french fries. If I wanted to go and get fast food out here, like, I have so many freaking options. I could go to McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa John's, Chick-fil-A, KFC, Wendy's, Sonic's, Steak and Shake, Checkers, Denny's, Waffle House. Like, oh my gosh, there is so much fast food options, which is great. But then when your husband says to you, like, do you want to get a takeaway tonight? You know, what do you want to eat? And you're like, and then you spend like 3 hours trying to figure out what you want for dinner. Yeah, so there's just so many options for takeaway. But not only fast food, like in England we have like Chinese food, Indian food, and then the fast food that I've just mentioned. Out here you've got Cuban food, you've got Mexican food, you've got Puerto Rican food, you've got Indian food, you've got Thai food, you've got sushi, Japanese food. Like, there's so much culture and so many different types of food. It's insane, which is great if you love to try new food. It's just the options are incredible out here. They're amazing, honestly. That's just one thing that's super different. I miss my English food so much. My husband actually found a picture on his phone the other day of his first ever chip shop, and it was kebab meat with chips, and there was a curry sauce on the side, and my mouth was drooling. And I insanely miss English food as a whole, but the choice out here is phenomenal, and it's like food is a totally different experience. Personally, I think the portion sizes are much bigger out here. A Happy Meal in England you wouldn't even get out here. A Happy Meal out here is an adult meal at McDonald's, which again is super different. But my husband disagrees and actually thinks that English meal sizes are portioned bigger. We apparently in England put it on smaller plates and then just put everything on it, so it kind of just looks like it's overflowing, whereas out here they put it on huge plates and it just looks bigger. So apparently it's just how things are done differently. I personally think portion sizes are much bigger out here because I rarely ever clean off my plate. Another thing with the food is there's a lot of like foods that I've come across which I'm like, where did they come from? For instance, the whole Thanksgiving sweet potato mash with marshmallows on top. Where did that come from? Honestly, like, I've tried it and it's not awful, but like, who invented that? There's things like that I've discovered here in Florida, or I've been shown, and it honestly blows my mind. It's so much fun. Honestly, there's so many differences here in America in general, but I love it. There's a lot of things that we actually both have, like scones out here are biscuits and they're eaten savoury with breakfast, whereas biscuits in England are cookies for Americans, and we eat scones, which are biscuit, as a sweet treat, and we have them with like jam and cream. That's like mainly how they're eaten in England, which I miss so much. I haven't found English gravy out here in America. Gravy here is like a white gravy. Maybe that's just Florida, I'm not quite sure. Please let me know down in the comments below. And if you know who invented the sweet potato marshmallow thing, I would also love to know. Maybe I should do like a challenge, like get my English friends to try weird American foods and share their responses on YouTube. Number 3. So I find the cost of living out here so bizarre. So if you live in England and you're watching this, Florida is one of the lowest paying states for a lot of careers as a whole, especially nurses. Like, this is one of the worst states to work as a nurse if you're in it for the money. But cost of living as a whole is like completely different here in Florida, as you would expect in a different country. In Florida it's slightly different as well because we don't have like a state tax, because Disney pays the state tax. So that's one good thing. But compared to England, some things are like completely opposite. For instance, in England, home insurance and car insurance are pretty cheap, to be honest. Out here they're thousands of dollars. The first time I was doing the car insurance and home insurance out here, yeah, I was completely shocked. I was like, is this right? Like, why are we paying like thousands of dollars for home insurance when in England I'm sure I paid like £30 a month, like my mind blown. So that's completely different. Some things are cheaper. I find like general items that you would buy at Walmart are cheaper. Food, I think, is a debatable one. Some foods are cheaper in England, some foods are cheaper out here, as you can expect. Careers wise, like for me as a nurse, when I start working would be as a graduate, first foot in the door position here in Florida. Will be earning 3 times more as I would in England, and that's even before negotiating a higher pay. So that again blows my mind. Another thing as well, gas prices out here are insanely cheap. Some things are like 100% like more expensive compared to England, but overall it's just different things cost different amount. But for me, I would be better off living out here because I'm going to do better as a nurse, which brings me on to point number 4. So as a nurse, I will do way better in a career out here as a nurse, which is a little bit sad. Something that upsets me and angers me a little bit about the UK, the way they treat nurses and just people in the healthcare field. I just don't think they're treated well at all. You know, I love the NHS, I love what everyone does, I worked for the NHS, but they just don't get treated how people of the NHS should be treated for what they do as a job. Out here, like I mentioned, I would start 3 times the salary, and that's before negotiating. Have more opportunities out here as a nurse. I feel like I'll have a whole better career after talking to all my friends that are nurses out here. I feel like life will just be so much different out here as a nurse. From the way my husband spoke about his past careers, generally jobs and careers out here, you have more opportunities. Things are more negotiable. I worked 4 different jobs prior to starting my job as a nurse in England, and I never once negotiated my wage. So yeah, some things are just totally different. Point number 5, my final point that I'm bringing to the table, and this is a pretty obvious one, but I'm diving into it because I have a love-hate relationship in both countries of this topic, and that is the weather. Oh my gosh, people from England constantly say to me, what is it like to live in Florida? It must be fantastic, you have the sun 24/7. It's not the case, honestly. We're in July right now and I'm like sweating and it's just so hot. It's actually Fahrenheit wise not too hot, it's 88 degrees, but the humidity is insane right now. As I mentioned, I have a love-hate relationship with the weather in both countries. In England, I have to say that I miss the seasons, and I miss autumn, fall, whatever you want to call it, so much. I miss that time of year where it's like Halloween, Thanksgiving, going into Christmas. The trees are changing colour, the leaves are falling off the trees. It's just like such a beautiful time of year, and you don't get that here in Florida. It's just blue skies, palm trees all year round, and it does get a little bit old. Even though it's beautiful to wake up to, it gets a little bit old. So like I say, I have a love-hate relationship with it. In England, when it was winter, I love dressing up for winter, boots, thick jackets, thick coats, scarves, just I love that kind of winter wardrobe. But in reality, in England, when it's winter, I hate it because you have to defrost your car and it's freezing cold, and winter days are just awful. You don't see any sunlight, especially as a nurse if you're doing 12-hour shifts. You wake up and it's pitch black, and you come out of work and it's pitch black, and honestly you just don't see any sunlight in the winter, and it can actually medically make people depressed because you don't see the sunlight and you don't get any vitamin D. So yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with it. Saying that, in the summer in England, we love it because we never see sun, or not like you do here in Florida, yet you don't get any escape from it because I'd say 98% of homes in England do not have aircon whatsoever. Even the hospital that I first started working at, it was only the intensive care unit and maybe 1 or 2 other units that had AC, like theatre, OR, they had AC, but regular med-surg hospital wards don't even have AC. So in the summer you really suffer when it's hot and there's just no escape from it whatsoever. But it's the same out here. I have, I'd say, 6 months of the year where the weather is beautiful and it's cool, and as I call it, an English summer's day. It's not too hot, you've got a lovely breeze, it's just perfect weather. And then you've got this time of year when it's just crazy hot and you want to go outside and you want to be in it, but it's just gross, like you're just sweaty and yeah. have a love-hate relationship with it. So yeah, people seem to have this idea that living in Florida is perfect because it's always sunny, but I promise you it's not. Not only that, but living in Florida, I've experienced a hurricane before, which I love watching the thunder and the storms here in Florida, just the regular kind of Wednesday storm. But a hurricane is completely different and is scary. You have to prepare for it, go and stock up your house. It's like an experience in itself. So yeah, you don't get that in England either. Never seen a tornado or hurricane. You don't get crazy weather. You rarely get thunder and lightning in England. So it's completely different. It's not always good and bad to both situations. Although it would be nice to see some orange trees as Thanksgiving approaches, but I don't think that's going to happen here in Florida. Going along with the weather as well, another thing that I've found and noticed is really different is that when the seasons change, when the clocks go forward and back in both countries, as I mentioned, I hated it in England when the clocks would go back. As a nurse, when you're working, you don't see any daylight. You wake up and it's pitch black. When you leave work at like 7 o'clock, it's already dark. You know, the sun sets in the winter around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, whereas here in Florida in the winter when the clocks have gone back, the sun's still set at like 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7. So even in the winter in Florida, the day is so much longer than England, which makes such a huge difference. I've said to Tony before, the days feel so much longer out here, which makes a difference when you've got kids and you want to go and do things and you've got hobbies and you want to go out and explore places. You haven't got to rely on the weather. You haven't got to rely on whether it's going to be dark. In England, if you wanted to have a barbecue, it would be like, oh, what's the weather doing this week? And in Florida, you don't have to rely on the weather to plan something like that. Yeah, so it's nice here in Florida not having to rely on the weather like you do in England. It's just not really a factor that you have to consider here in Florida, which is really, really nice. So those are my 5 biggest differences from living in England to live in Florida in particular. If you had an opposite opinion, please let me know down in the comments below, because I would be really interested to hear about your thoughts on living in Florida, whether there's something I've mentioned like driving. Do you find it different in where you're from? Just let me know down in the comments below, because I'd love to hear what you think. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. That is all for this week. See you soon.